Story 1. The Farmer and the Clown. As a teenager, I used to love Halloween, but the Halloween of 2001 was my last. What happened to my brother and me terrified us so badly that we would never celebrate the holiday ever again. It's the most horrific experience either of us have ever been through in our lives. My friends and I had planned to visit a haunted house. To get to my friend Seth's place, we would often cut through the woods and then a field, which was a quicker route compared to the longer winding road. This field was owned by a cranky farmer who detested our trespassing. On more than one occasion he had yelled at us, "It'd be a shame if you boys disappeared in those woods." The woods were an eerie place that we rarely took at night. Despite our past experiences, though, the thrill of Halloween and the convenience of a shortcut made it appealing. My little brother and I said our goodbyes to our parents and made our way out the door. Just as we had done so many times, we trekked down the path on our way to our friend's house. It was a full moon that night, making it bright enough for us to see our way, but causing us to be foolish enough not to take along flashlights. As expected, the woods were dark and creepy. Our only company was the typical sounds of the woods at night and our footsteps down the dirt trail. My brother and I walked along, not saying much, just trying to get to the end of the trail and into the field as quickly as possible. Everything was going as planned until we were about halfway into the hike. At first, I thought I saw some movement near a large tree to the right, off the path and into the woods a bit. I grabbed my brother's shoulder and we stopped walking. "What is it?" my brother asked. "Hold on," I said, my eyes locked onto the tree. I stared at it for a moment, searching for any movement, but I didn't see any. "Guess it was nothing," I said to my brother. "Come on, let's hurry up and get on the other side of this trail." As we made our way down the trail a little bit further, something came over me. It was just like an overwhelming feeling of dread. Something wasn't right. I don't recall ever hearing anything like footsteps or branches breaking or anything, but something just came over me and told me to turn around. When I did, the sight that met my eyes literally made my blood freeze. There was a figure, dressed as a clown, standing on the part of the trail we had just passed. It stood there, completely silent, just staring at us. The clown's silent stillness, combined with the muted glow from the moonlight, gave it the most nightmarish quality I had ever seen in my life. My brother began trembling. We stood there, our eyes locked onto the clown's, not saying anything. The woods seemed to go completely quiet. Not knowing what else to do, I called out, trying to defuse the situation. "Hey man, nice clown outfit." Silence was the only reply. The figure remained motionless. Taking a braver tone, I taunted, "Hey, the circus is the other way." My brother's grip tightened on my arm and his voice trembled as he said, "Let's just go. This isn't right." But before we could make another move, the clown began to slowly step towards us. When it did, I noticed something. This clown wasn't wearing those big floppy red shoes that people see on most clowns. It was wearing boots. Brown, lace-up boots. My attention to the boots was short-lived, though. The dread I felt earlier intensified. My heart was hammering in my chest, and every hair on my body stood on end. "Hey, we're just trying to get to our friend's place," I stuttered, trying to reason with the figure. But again, there was no response. The clown just kept coming closer and closer. Then, it did something that will forever be burned in my mind. With its right hand, eyes still locked onto us, it reached around behind it and slowly pulled out a knife. Not just any knife, it was a massive knife. I'm guessing it had at least a 10-inch blade on it. My brother, trembling even more now than before, could barely even muster out a whisper. "We need to run." Without even giving him a response, I pushed him forward towards the field, and we both began to run. We were both terrified, and my brother started screaming. "Run! Just run!" I was yelling out to him. As we began to run, the clown gave chase, and it was gaining ground quickly. I could hear the thud of its boots inching closer and closer. In a split second, I made a decision. "Run as fast as you can to Seth's house and don't stop. Don't look behind you," I said to my brother. He didn't say anything. He just kept running down the trail. As he did, I darted off to the left into the woods and started screaming, "I'm over here! I'm over here!" I remember feeling so helpless. If what I had just done worked, then my brother would be safe. If it didn't, I was too far away now, and there was nothing that I could do to save him. Luckily for my brother, it worked. The clown slowed a bit and hesitated, as if deciding which one of us to come after. It seemed as if the clown made a split-second decision too, and veered off to the left, coming after me. I was both relieved and terrified because I knew my brother was safe, but now I was in horrible danger. As I sprinted through the woods, I heard a thud and shot a glance behind me. I looked back and saw the clown on the ground. It appeared that it had tripped while trying to leap over a log. I seized this chance and veered right, finding a large tree to hide behind. The clown approached, searching the surroundings, knife still in hand. Every second felt like an hour as it sought me out. Tears began welling up in my eyes, and I struggled to control my breathing, trying not to give away my position. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the clown exhale a large breath, as if frustrated that it had lost me. Then footsteps as it began quickly retreating back towards the trail. I didn't know what to do. If I moved, it might be waiting on me and come back after me. If I stayed, it might circle back around and find me. Frozen with fear and unsure of my next move, I sat hidden and sobbed softly. Time seemed to stand still. Every minute felt like an eternity. 10 minutes went by, then 15, then 20. But finally, after about 45 minutes, the distant sound of people yelling reached my ears. Flashlights cut through the darkness, and familiar voices called out my name. Gathering every ounce of courage I had, I emerged from my hiding spot and raced towards them as fast as I could. It was my brother, accompanied by a few of our friends. The relief was overwhelming. Together we made our way back to Seth's house, where I relayed the terrifying ordeal. To my disappointment, Seth's parents brushed it off, thinking it was just a Halloween prank. My own parents had a similar reaction when I called them. Part of me was certain it was the farmer, trying to scare us off his land once and for all. Those brown lace-up boots kept coming back to me. It had to be the farmer, right? Who else could it have been? And that knife, it was the real thing. I know it was. One thing was certain, though. If it was the farmer, and it was his intent to keep us out of those woods and off of his land for good, it worked. My brother and I never ventured through those woods or across that farmer's field ever again. Story 2. The Slaughterhouse. In the autumn of 2014, with the anticipation of Halloween hanging in the air, I found myself working at a haunted house. At 18, I was eager for any opportunity to make some money, and this seemed like a fun, temporary gig that would pad my pockets a bit. The venue was an old slaughterhouse, which had once seen countless animals meet their fate. It laid silent and forgotten for a time until it was purchased and repurposed for various events. Every October, it transformed into a house of horrors. I spent the first 2 weeks as part of the decoration team, setting the ambiance with cobwebs, eerie lighting, and the typical haunted house frills. Everything went relatively smooth until the second day, when we stumbled upon a room that stopped us dead in our tracks. The walls and floor of this room were covered in unsettling drawings. Symbols and signs that seemed ritualistic sprawled everywhere. Among the markings were remnants of what looked like candle wax and other paraphernalia, suggesting that someone, or some group, had been conducting some occult practices there. Unlike the other artificially spooky rooms we had set up, this one had an aura of genuine dread about it. Even in the broad daylight, with a group of us together, it felt as though we were intruding upon something we shouldn't be. It felt like we were being watched in that room. Stories quickly spread among the crew, sounds that seemed to come from nowhere, objects moving inexplicably, and shadows that would catch the corner of your eye just before disappearing into nothing. It was difficult to discern whether the rumors were playful jests, conjured to set the atmosphere and get a rise out of the crew, or if there was really something to them. Could something deep and sinister really be going on in that room? Regrettably, I'd soon find out firsthand. The stage was set, and a few weeks out from Halloween, we began receiving guests. Rotating positions meant each of us had to play our roles in different rooms, and I had the grave misfortune of being stationed in that eerie room 3 times. With each shift, the sense of dread only intensified. The artificial fog, the haunting soundtrack we played, and the dim lighting only added to the unsettling feeling in that room. At times, in the darkness, I'd think I saw movements, but I brushed it off as tricks my mind played on me in the haunted setting. But Halloween night, the grand finale of our haunted venture, was when the real horror struck. I was assigned to the room again. I remember dreading it and not wanting to go in there, but I also remember telling myself to just get it done and get it over with. As the evening wore on and more visitors passed through, the room seemed to grow heavier and more ominous. During one of the brief lulls between groups, I felt a chill run down my spine. I felt like I was being watched. I used my phone's light to get a better look in the room. What I saw absolutely terrified me. In the corner is what I could only describe as a black mass. It just hovered in the corner of the room, formless, yet it felt like it was alive, and it felt like it was watching me. Shivers ran straight through me as I heard the final group coming through. Not knowing what else to do, I switched off my light and told myself that I didn't see what I just saw. As the next group entered, their excited and nervous chatter was a stark contrast to the heart-stopping fear that I felt. As the lights went out and they entered, I swear I felt a breath-like sensation against my ear, and the feeling of someone, or something, brushing up against my arm. I screamed out loud. The crowd, not realizing my true distress, screamed as well, and then began to laugh. I was in an absolute panic. Every hair on my body was standing straight up. I didn't know what else to do, so I just stood there, completely frozen. I remember panting, trying to control my breathing but unable to do so. The more I panicked, the more the group took it as part of the show. I waited, my eyes wide and darting back and forth to see if I could catch a glimpse of anything, but all I could see was darkness. I tried to stay composed for the visitors, but every ounce of me wanted to run. The seconds dragged by as the group made jokes, laughed and screamed, not realizing that there was true terror going on in that room. As soon as the group finally exited, I made my exit as well. I left the building immediately and went straight home. And that was the last night I ever set foot in that converted slaughterhouse. The pay wasn't nearly enough to justify the horrors I had experienced. I've since heard rumors that the place is genuinely haunted, with many speculating that the ritualistic remnants we found had awakened something. Whatever the case may be, I want nothing to do with it, and will never ever go back to those grounds again. Story 3. The Abandoned Asylum. I never considered myself an adrenaline junkie or a thrill seeker, but there I was, a young 20-year-old, standing on the grounds of the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum in Weston, West Virginia. It was Halloween night, and a few of my friends wanted to do something different. This massive Gothic-style structure had been constructed in the mid-1800s, intended to be a haven for the mentally ill, a place of solace. But with time, the narrative changed. Overcrowding led to inhumane conditions, dark treatments methods were employed, and the place became a ground zero for suffering until it was finally closed. The building had been left to wither, and stories about the agonies once hosted there turned it into a sort of local legend. It was the kind of place that dared to be explored, and we fell for it. I remember that night clearly. We went in, half-cocked, with just a couple of flashlights. Our guts were inflated by a mix of cockiness and sheer curiosity. Its windows, like hollow eyes, watched us as we trespassed onto the grounds. Inside, the air was thick, like it was holding onto years of stories and regrets. It was easy to joke at first, to laugh off the heaviness in the air. But as we probed deeper into the labyrinth of rooms and hallways, our laughter died away. The layout made no sense. Corridors twisted into unusual angles. Rooms led into more rooms, and doors sometimes opened into sheer drops to the floors below, as if the building itself was disoriented. We knew about the overcrowding, the patients crammed into spaces unfit for humans, and walking through, we could almost hear the echo of their struggles. The deeper we went, the more we felt the weight of the place. Graffiti was everywhere, leaving behind both art and warnings. "Leave," one word implored, spray-painted near a stairwell that descended into darkness. As the night wore on, we all became more and more jittery. The laughs dried up, and so did our enthusiasm for the adventure. Not long into our journey of this decrepit place, we had already decided that we'd had enough. But just as we were about to leave, we heard footsteps, The sound was unmistakable, the slow drag of feet somewhere in the depths of the asylum. I don't know why we followed the sound. I guess sometimes curiosity can override survival instincts. But we did so, and eventually ended up in what looked like what had once been a communal area. It was there that we saw a figure. It was a man in the shadows. He was real, not some apparition, and that reality struck deep fear into my heart. He was dragging something, and the sound of metal scraping against the floor was like a blade through the eerie silence. We flipped on our flashlights, trying to get a better look. As we did, he turned slowly, and his eyes caught the light of our beams. I've never seen that kind of emptiness in someone's eyes, a kind of desperate hopelessness. He wasn't some relic of the past. He was very much in the present, and that realization jolted us to the core. His eyes squinted with scorn, and his lips curled up, exposing his rotting teeth. Panic took over then. We ran. The exit was nowhere in sight, and it felt like we were running through a never-ending nightmare. When we finally burst through the entrance, into the night air, we didn't stop running until the distant lights of the town were visible. We parted ways with minimal exchanges and never spoke of it again. But the experience, the history of the place, and the man with the hollow eyes stayed with me. It was a stark reminder of the thin line that separates the past from the present, the living from the haunted spaces they inhabit, and the forgotten individuals who slip between those cracks. Story 4. There's something wrong with my sister. I can still remember it as if it happened yesterday, even though it's been decades. Halloween night in our small, quiet neighborhood was always a special occasion. The anticipation of dressing up and collecting candy was enough to make any kid's heart race with excitement. My story happened back in the late 90s. I was just a young boy back then, and my older sister had promised to take me trick-or-treating. Little did I know that this Halloween would terrify me for years to come. We headed out just as the sun was about to set, and I remember there being an electricity in the air. I guess part of it was excitement, and part of it was fear, because I was still a little boy, and could still get scared quite easily. My sister dressed as a witch, and had the entire outfit head to toe. She even had a witch's mask, with the pointy nose and everything. She held my hand tightly as we knocked on doors and yelled, "Trick or treat." We went door to door, and I scooped up as much candy as I could get my hands on. About 45 minutes in, we got separated for a brief moment. When I finally caught up to her, I asked her where she had been, but she just looked at me. I didn't think much of it, and grabbed her hand, and we continued going door to door for about 15 or 20 more minutes. As we continued trick-or-treating, something felt off about her. She wasn't speaking much, and her movements were just weird. Honestly, I thought maybe she saw somebody she didn't like, or saw a boy she did like with someone else or something. I honestly didn't know. When we returned home, she was still acting weird. My parents were in the garage handing out candy, so I ran up to them and showed them how much I had gathered. My sister just kind of stood around and didn't talk. My sister had always been full of energy, but something was up and she was eerily quiet. Her and I went inside and left my parents to finish up handing out candy. My sister moved slowly into the kitchen. I remember her taking really slow steps and just looking around. It was so creepy. I went into the living room to tend to my candy. I was snacking away, just eating candy, when I asked my sister if she was ever going to take off her costume. At least take that hideous mask off. When I didn't get a response, I turned around and she was standing directly behind me, just staring at me, motionless. At this point, I was part creeped out and part annoyed. Part of me told me that she was really going the extra mile to creep me out, and the other part told me that something was really off. Just then I could hear some loud talking coming from the garage where my parents were. I turned back around, and a few seconds later they bolted through the door. Looking part terrified and part panicked, they looked at me and asked who was with me. I was confused, and gave them that kind of look like, "What are you talking about?" Just then, my sister, with her mask off, walked in behind them. My eyes got really wide and I was so confused. I turned around and whoever was behind me that I thought was my sister was gone. In the kitchen, the door that led to the backyard was wide open. My parents were in a panic and started searching all around the house. Whoever it was never found. What's even creepier is that we later found that a knife was missing from the knife block, and we were never able to find it. To this day, I tell myself that it really was just my sister, and she had just snuck out the back door and came around to the garage. But she swears it wasn't. She said that she lost me and couldn't find me, and so she just came home, and that's where she found me. There are still so many questions, though. If it wasn't my sister, who the hell was it and what were their intentions? If it wasn't her, how was it then that whoever it was could have had the same exact costume that my sister was wearing? Where in the hell did that knife go? As a grown man now, it's a mystery that still gives me chills to think about all these years later.
Story 5. This dress comes with a story. I had always been drawn to the unusual, the offbeat, the things that had a story to tell. So when I stumbled onto an old vintage shop on the corner of a street in a nearby town that I was visiting, I couldn't resist stepping inside. It was a dusty, dimly lit place. It had vintage everything, antique furniture, and a host of knickknacks that had seen better days. As I browsed through, a beautiful Victorian-era looking gown caught my eye. It didn't look like it was an actual dress from the Victorian era, but it was certainly a good replica, so I believed. I thought to myself, this could make an excellent Halloween costume. I looked at the price tag, just $10. I was sold. There was an elderly shop owner and she smiled at me as I held up the dress at the register. "That's a special one," she said. "Comes with a story." I obliged her to tell me more. It's said to be cursed, belonged to a woman named Evelyn who lived in this town decades ago. She wore it to a Halloween party, but something terrible happened that night. No one knows what, but she disappeared without a trace, and the dress was all they found. I honestly chuckled a little bit. My first thought was, well, that's not a very good pitch from someone trying to sell something to me. But honestly, like I said, the woman was elderly, and so I blew it off and told her I'd take my chances. She smiled and rang me up. After I returned home with the dress, I decided to tuck it away in my closet. To keep it separate from my everyday clothes, I placed it all the way on the left side. Or so I thought I did. The next day, I opened my closet door to find the dress had mysteriously migrated to the right side. I was sure I had put it on the left, and this small but eerie change freaked me out. It was the first in a series of strange occurrences that started happening. I began hearing noises in the dead of night, strange creaks and bumps that would wake me up. Stuff around the house seemed to be out of place too. Not big stuff, just little stuff that made me feel like I was going crazy. When Halloween night finally arrived, I reluctantly decided to wear the dress. Ever since I brought it home, it had been giving me the creeps. But it was Halloween now, and it was time to wear it. From the moment I put it on, I didn't feel like myself. I felt so emotional. I just felt dread and paranoia. I went to a Halloween party and felt like someone was following me the entire night. I was a mess. Even my friends were asking what was up with me. I tried to make the best of the night, but I really just wanted to get home and sleep it off. After I got home, I cleaned up and went to bed. That night I had a horrific nightmare. In the dream, I was at a party, just like a party that I really had been at that night. But in the dream, I was walking home alone for some reason. I was walking down a secluded dirt road when I felt something behind me. At first, there was nothing, but as I continued to walk, I began hearing footsteps. I turned around and there was a dark figure. He was approaching and I was terrified. I began to run, but I wasn't fast enough. He caught up to me, and just as he was reaching out to grab me, I screamed and woke up. I was in a cold sweat and tears were coming out of my eyes. I've never been one to believe in curses, but something told me that the dress had something to do with everything that was going on. I wanted to get rid of it. My first thought was, what would I say to the elderly woman? "Hey, turns out this dress really is cursed. I'd like to return it." I feel like I would have looked so silly. I also felt that if there was something going on with it, I didn't want to pass it on to someone else. So the next day, I drove out to a dumpster and threw it away. Almost immediately, things returned to normal. The paranoia that had been following me was gone, and things went back to the way they were before I bought that dress. No more noises at night, no things shuffling around, no more feeling like I'm being followed. I'll never be able to say with 100% certainty that everything had to do with the dress, but I can say that ever since I got rid of it, things have been back to normal. I've learned my lesson. If someone ever tells me that something comes with a story, I think next time I probably won't take my chances on it.
Story 6. Trick or treat at the cabin. 2020 was a rough year for my girlfriend and me, as I'm sure it was for most other people as well. By the time October rolled around, we felt like we'd been put through the ringer. Every month had its own brand of chaos. Liz, my girlfriend, must have sensed my stress, because she floated the idea of escaping it all for a bit. She suggested that we go to my uncle's cabin for Halloween. Honestly, I loved the idea. It was in the mountains. No kids banging on the door for candy, no city noise, just peace and quiet. We pulled into the cabin just after sunset. It was beautiful and serene, the kind of view that makes you forget your worries. We quickly unpacked and whipped up some sandwiches. Nothing fancy, but in that moment, with that view, it felt like a 5-star meal. After eating, we sprawled out on the old couch and decided on watching a movie. Liz loved romantic comedies, and I knew this, so before we left, I downloaded a few to my laptop. We cozied up on the couch and let all the stress and anxiety of the past few months melt away. Our relaxing state of bliss would be short-lived, however. We were about halfway through the movie when 3 loud bangs echoed through our cabin. We both jumped, our heads whipping over in the direction of the door. The 3 bangs were followed by a thundering deep voice. "Trick or treat," someone shouted from outside. Liz looked at me, confusion and panic written all over her face. We were in the middle of nowhere. Who the hell would be out here? Trying to keep my cool, mostly for Liz's sake, I headed to the door, expecting to find some lost hikers or something. At least that's what I told myself, probably in an attempt to keep my own nerves in check. I swung the door open, ready to either help or scold, but there was no one, just the dark woods and the sound of crickets. I stepped out looking around. Nothing. I walked from one side of the porch to the other, scanning the surrounding woods. There was no one, at least no one that I could see. When I returned back inside, Liz was still on the couch, wide-eyed and cloaked in worry. "Maybe we should call the cops," she whispered. I hesitated. "It's probably just some kids playing pranks," I tried to reason, not entirely believing it myself. But deep down, I didn't want our peaceful getaway to turn into a police scene over what might have been a simple joke. Aside from that, it would take the cops hours to get out here, and that's if we could even get cell phone service, which was spotty at best. We settled back in, though the mood had shifted. The movie continued to play, though I believe neither of us were really paying attention to it anymore. As I held Liz and stared at the tiny screen, a soft, persistent scratching sound came from the window to our left. Liz was the first to look over. "What in the hell is that? Do you hear that?" she mouthed. I got up, more annoyed than scared this time, and looked out the window. Nothing. It was like the woods were playing tricks on us. Trying to shake it off, I joked, "Maybe it's a squirrel wanting to join our movie night." But Liz wasn't laughing. In fact, she started screaming. It was piercing, and took me by complete surprise. As I whipped around, she was staring, horrified, at another window. I followed her gaze and my heart dropped. I could see the silhouette of huge, broad shoulders in the window. There was a large man peering in, and whoever it was wearing a terrifying hockey mask. Instinctually, wanting to protect Liz, I darted for the front door so that I could get outside and confront the individual. As it was later revealed to me by Liz, as I bolted out the front door, the figure bolted as well, in the direction of the surrounding woods. As I came around the corner, there was no one, only the sound of heavy footsteps tromping through the woods. For a moment I was torn between what to do. Should I pursue the individual into the woods? What would I do then? I had no weapon or any other means of protection. Not wanting to leave Liz alone, I returned. As soon as I stepped foot back into the cabin, I didn't hesitate. "Get your stuff now. We're leaving," I said to Liz. She didn't hesitate either. She jumped up, put her shoes on, and slammed the laptop shut as I grabbed my keys. We both made a dash for the car and peeled out of there. As we approached town, I finally got a reliable signal and called my uncle. As I detailed what happened, I half expected him to start laughing, claiming it was a Halloween prank or something, but he was adamant that it wasn't him and that he didn't know anything about it. "Should I call the cops?" I asked. "No," he said. "Just come on in and gather yourselves and we'll try to figure out what's going on." And so that's what we did. The next day, I met up with my uncle and we returned back to the cabin to investigate. Liz, understandably, stayed behind. As we walked around the cabin, there were large footprints on the porch and around the windows. "I don't know, my boy," my uncle said to me. "Someone was definitely out here." Months went by, and memories of that night began to fade. One day, though, I got a call from my uncle. "Hey boy, just returned from the cabin," he said. "Found something you might find interesting." My ears perked up as he detailed what he found. "I was up at the cabin doing some scouting for the upcoming hunting season," he said. "About a third of a mile out from the cabin, we found a really old burned-out campfire." He paused for a moment, then continued. "It had an old charred-up hockey mask in it." My blood went cold. To this day I still ponder about the man in the hockey mask on Halloween night. Who was this person and why was he stalking us? Was he just trying to scare us? To get a good laugh? Or was he waiting for the perfect opportunity to do something more sinister? I may never know, and quite frankly, I don't think that I want to know. Story 7. A Street from Another Dimension. Growing up, Halloween was always the highlight of the year for me. The excitement, the costumes, the free candy. It was a child's dream. But one particular Halloween stands out from the rest, not for the amount of candy I got or the costume I wore, but for the sheer eeriness of an experience I had with my little sister, Lily. I was about 15 at the time, stuck in that awkward phase between childhood and adolescence. Lily was 9, and everything about Halloween still enchanted her. That year, she'd chosen a fairy princess costume, complete with a sparkling tiara and wand. I, on the other hand, opted for a simple zombie costume. Nothing too flashy, but it did the job. Our neighborhood was always a hot spot for Halloween. Houses went all out with their decorations, and the streets were filled with children, their laughter echoing through the air. After a couple of hours of wandering from door to door, our bags were filled to the brim. "We should head home," I suggested, noting the fatigue in Lily's eyes. Wanting to cut our time short, we opted for a shortcut down a street that would shave off a good 7 or 8 minutes from our journey. We made our way there, chatting animatedly about our night. However, as we turned onto that street, something was really off. Gone were the familiar sounds of Halloween. Instead, it was completely silent and still. Every house was dark, not a single porch light on. No jack-o'-lanterns, kids trick-or-treating, no parents, and no cars. It was like a ghost town, literally. We did see one thing, though, and it was terrifying. Standing beneath the dim glow of a single street lamp was a man draped in a pitch-black robe. He was motionless. His face was hidden deep inside a large hood. Lily clutched my arm, her earlier excitement replaced by fear now. "Bubby, who is that? Why are they just standing there?" she asked. I tried to muster up some courage, hoping to reassure her. "It's probably just someone in their costume trying to scare kids for fun," I whispered, though I wasn't convinced of it myself. But the longer we stood there, the more I felt a sense of dread. Why was this street so different from the others? Why was it void of all life except for this one mysterious figure? Lily's voice trembled. "I don't like it here. Let's go back." I nodded in agreement. Without another word, we turned and made our way back to the more familiar, lively streets. We didn't stop until we reached our front door, panting and out of breath. Our parents were in the living room, enjoying a horror movie marathon. We recounted our tale, expecting concern, or at least a bit of intrigue. Instead, they laughed it off, suggesting that our imaginations had gotten the better of us. "It's Halloween, kids. People try to be spooky. That's the whole point," our dad had said, chuckling. The following day, life resumed its normalcy. Still intrigued by the eerie experience from the previous night, I went out to the street in the daylight. Everything seemed ordinary. Cars were driving up and down the road, kids were playing, and people were walking their dogs. The streetlight with the mysterious figure seemed completely normal. I later met a kid that lived on that street. "That's weird," he said. "My friends and I were up and down that street all night. People were everywhere." When he told me that, it just didn't make any sense to me. The next Halloween, however, I remembered that night. With a mixture of curiosity and nervousness, Lily and I decided to visit that street again. To our surprise, it was bustling with activity. Decorated houses, children in costumes, the familiar Halloween ambiance. It was as if the previous year's events had never happened. For years, I pondered over that eerie Halloween night. Did we experience a glitch in reality? Had we stepped into an alternate dimension? The only logical explanation that I could come up with is that the entire neighborhood went dark to play a prank on two kids walking down the street. But even that seems completely unlikely. I may never know the answers. It was the creepiest thing my sister and I had ever experienced. We never experienced anything like it before, and haven't experienced anything like it since.